In the last few years, my husband is also a trauma ER nurse, and we were busy working, 3 kids, trying to be healthy, having an inclusive household where we have the full spectrum. My husband's like Montana, meat, potatoes, bread and beer. I mean, that's Montana upbringing. And then me being allergic to eggs, a lactose intolerant daughter, and then a son who cannot tolerate meat at all. So, and we're foodies. We love good food. So, decided to harness my scientific background to crack the code. I mean, you know how it goes, like a million and a half recipe fails. You're like, gosh, this is getting expensive and discouraging. And so I decided to pull from my nutraceutical background and the research side and said, I'm just gonna try to crack the code of like when we remove, XYZ from a recipe, mainly being dairy, eggs, and wheat, it's protein. And certain chemical reactions that happen to create desirable baked goods are all reliant on these combinations of the proteins and the polysaccharides. So I was like, hey, I bet we can replicate this. We're going to pull from the clean label industry, nutraceuticals, and we were able to put something together to where we're like, okay, we've made a tough waffle that browns like a beautiful Belgian waffle. The palate of the average consumer has diversified to where people aren't expecting Wonder Bread anymore. Like it's just, people are, it's not like it was in the 80s where you get laughed at if you brought squishy wheat bread to school, There is a real responsive consumer demand that's interested in novel grains and novel flavors. And, like for instance, our rosemary garlic focaccia bread, I mean, that's a really flavor forward product. Sorghum is the #1 ingredient, and it's a whole grain sorghum. So it's not for the faint of heart with flavor. But what I would say, I'm like, if IPA has been the top selling beer for the last 6 years, like people are not afraid of flavor. You can't tell me Americans are afraid of flavor anymore. Like that's antiquated, and that's trickling into our other like commodity food things. I mean, people aren't just eating potatoes anymore. Like they're eating sweet potatoes or yams or purple potatoes. I mean, there's just this massive diversification of the palate that's happened, and that's where we like to leverage that opportunity. It's, we make flavor forward foods. Our cookie is, I'm a sick nurse, so I'm always like, oh, that's our gateway drug into the Snacktivist experience. And it tastes just like a regular cookie. It's light-bodied. We rely more heavily on the rices and the starches blended with the flavor forward ancient grains in that product. But it really was designed with kids in mind.